Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, salatu salam ala Rasulillah. I want to follow up on one idea. I'll repeat it at the risk of redundancy, but it's important. So you live your life and you have a particular set of thoughts that we call a paradigm. And then you get introduced to new information. For example, in my case was the issue of the time frame of the development of the embryo. For whatever reason, it creates contradiction between what you have in your head and what that new information. And then you go into some form of dysfunction. What I mean by dysfunction is when I sit in the lecture, for example, and I listen to it. Obviously, I'm trying to learn a new subject, but I have conflict going inside of me, about faith and religion and all of that. It's not a simple issue. You go home and you want to do your homework, or you want to, catch up on your studies, and you're sort of thinking about this. So it's not something simple that you could ignore. It's a daily, a real, tangible, daily problem. So you seek solution. You try to seek resolution by seeking solution. In this particular example, what I wanted to, as an afterthought, in this particular example, there is actually a different way to interpret the hadith that will transform the picture from a contradiction that is causing you problems to actually something close to a miraculous. By simple reinterpretation of the hadith, and the text does allow for that, to interpret the 40-day time frame as the same 40 days. Like in 40 days this happened, and in the same 40 days this happened, and in the same 40 days the third stage happened, and then he starts to be something else, and then the ruh and all of that stuff. If you actually interpret it in that context, which is not the way our forefathers understood it, but if you interpret it in that context, it actually is miraculous, to say the least, because it is what is happening in real life. It does approve 100% with the observation in terms of embryology. And there have some people that did this. So this particular example, while it may have been a problem for me personally, the solution was simple, just reinterpretation of the hadith. But the point here is there had to be some update. Now you may say, well, this is not a deep update, but there has to be some update. And with the update, the understanding, which is, again, it's a combination of divine and human component, and you made an update to the human component, and with that update, it became functional again. How did it become functional? The problem went away. All the negative feelings surrounded went away. All the concerns and skepticism went away, and even more, it became something that strengthened the faith, because then the hadith of Prophet ﷺ is talking. Obviously, I believe that he actually said that because it's talking about something 100% true. Yes, in about 40 days, maybe 42 days, which is 8 weeks, or 40 some days, which is 8 weeks, all of these phases actually happen. But the key point is you had to do an update. So as you face problems, and in problem A, you create some kind of update. You turn a dysfunctional situation into functional again. Problem B, the same thing. Maybe the solution is a little deeper, maybe a little more superficial. But as you face a multiple set of problems, and you screen, now you screen the methodology that you're following with those repeated updates, you reach a conclusion. If you take the sum of all of that, the integral of all of that, to use the language of calculus, you realize that you're painting a new picture. And that painting a new picture, you are updating the epistemology. You're updating the actual epistemology.
Can you define epistemology?
Epistemology is the science of how we know what we know. And this is a general, it's not specific to Islam. In Islam, we're going to call it Islamic Epistemology. But how do we know what we know? You have a set of beliefs, you have a set of ideas, you have a set of convictions, you have a set of historical information or events that you ascribe to and you interpret in a particular way. But how do you know those things? That is, if you go into the details of how you know what you know, the sum of all of that is the science of epistemology. But when you do those updates repeatedly, time and time and time again, and some of them may be superficial, some of them may be deep, a big picture of you are bound, whether you want it or not, you're bound to update the epistemological system that you are using, i.e. the details of the paradigm, because the paradigm at the end of the day is a form of an epistemology. I may have a paradigm, I have my own epistemology, you may ascribe to the same paradigm and use the same epistemology, or you may disagree with it, and so forth. So I just wanted to clarify that, because the issue of the embryo was actually not a big problem, but it did start me going on that path.
Well, I mean, I think that's right, and it actually is a really good segue for talking about something that we did not talk about in the first two sessions. We were speaking specifically towards Muslims, for Muslims, right? You know, like Muslims that are trying to hold on to their religion, but they are presented with this stress that you were talking about, and this dysfunction that you constantly bringing up. But from a non-Muslim perspective, or even from a Muslim perspective of somebody who is kind of at the brink, he's under so much stress that, you know, he can then argue, well, why are you clinging on to something that could be dying, or that doesn't make any sense anymore? You know, why not just go beyond it and then, you know, find, you know, like seek the answers, you know, to the questions that you have, you know, elsewhere? Like, why are we holding on to this?
Okay, so and maybe along the same lines, not only the non-Muslims, but like you said, people that you know, when we talked about the response to stress, and if one group would run forward to try to imitate and integrate with the dominant culture, maybe that applies to, this question applies to them as well. The reality is, if you try to dump your paradigm completely, abandon your paradigm completely, you go into a new mode of thinking. And the assumption that goes into that is that you are now a free thinker. You are now free to think whatever you want. You're not hostage, or you're not chained. But the reality is, you move from one paradigm and you enter another paradigm. Whether you actually feel it and you're conscientious about the new paradigm that you entered or not. And invariably, that new paradigm that you're going to move to, whether this comes from atheists or non-Muslims, or comes from Muslims that are running forward to integrate, run away from their own culture and religion and integrate in the dominant culture, they will form into another paradigm, which is basically materialism. And materialism, like any other paradigm, has assumptions upon which the paradigm is built. Those assumptions that are the foundation of materialism are choices. This is what people don't understand. This is what people are not even conscientious of. Invariably, the primary building block, axiom assumptions of a paradigm, with time, because the person uses the paradigm all the time, or you were born into it, or you get integrated into it in everyday life, those primary assumptions are pushed to the subconscious. So those that consider themselves free thinkers, ascribe to the paradigm of materialism, they have just entered another paradigm, whether they realize it or not. So if they want to say, well, you know, why don't you become let's say a free thinker, or abandon this, or whatnot? Well, show me what you have. What you have is not better, because I can question those primary assumptions, and I can tell you how they are built on choices, and very, very poor choices for that matter. So this is the first part to answer your question, is the alternative is not great. But more importantly, what we have, you know, just sit down and read the Quran. I mean, there is nothing in the Quran that doesn't touch the human feeling and the spirit and the inside on every single level, on emotional, on psychological, on intellectual. The Quran is Allah's word, which is talking to us. I mean, people who have that, they just want to give up and abandon. They've never sat down and actually read the book. Even Muslims. I mean, we, part of the prevailing Islamic paradigm is that we tend to read the Quran in a way that doesn't give us the full value of the book, and we can talk about that later. But if you read the book, there is no way you can run away from the reality that there's creation and there's creator, and there's very big questions that have to be answered. You can ignore them, but that's exactly what you're doing. You're just ignoring them. You want to live as an agnostic, you want to live as an atheist, it's fine. You can do that. But that doesn't mean you actually answered those big questions that we face every time. And the Quran answers those questions for us. And the Quran, Quran is miraculous by every extent of the word. We just have to discover that. So those people that claim, why are you hanging on to this as a non-Muslim? The question is, have you actually done your homework? Have you actually read the Quran? Have you actually entertained the concepts and the ideas? Not just the linguistics. The linguistics is something that Arabs can appreciate. But the concepts and ideas that this book is trying to challenge our minds to think about, and our souls, not just the minds, every aspect of a human existence. Most of them don't. Most of them haven't. So people that abandon Islam, or people that choose atheism, they're doing exactly that. It's a choice. It's a choice. The underlying, they may give you a logical deduction about problems. Oh, because of this, evolution, conclusion that, cosmology, conclusion that, we this particular scientific discovery, that particular scientific, we conclude that. But if you go back and reevaluate the entire argument all the way to its primary assumptions, you will discover that it's built on choices, and very, very poor choices and easily challengeable choices. I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah,
if it doesn't.
It does. We're probably going to need to go back into it and give some concrete examples, because, like you said, not everybody has read it, and even if they have read it, they may not understand it and get what you are describing, what you are talking about. So I think it would be worth it to visit some of those things, and kind of just go over it as a premise of, well, this is why we are doing all of this, is because there is something that is fundamentally pure and miraculous in it, and we just need to go towards that.
Yes. The final afterthought that I wanted to mention is, and again, this mainly pertains to Muslims and to the Arab societies, our cultural existence as a whole. Of course, our religion is part of our identity, but the identity as a whole is under attack from globalization, which is a misnomer in my opinion, because it is Euro-centered globalization or American-centered globalization. It's not a fair multicultural globalization. So we're under pressure, we're under attack, people are reacting differently. The people that are running forward, the people that are saying, oh, we want to be free thinkers, and we want to be, we want to reevaluate, everything. People that may sound like what I'm saying, but they come up with stuff that always, or almost always, is a photocopy of what comes to us from the West. Are actually deep down, they are not invaders in any way. And this is very important. What I'm talking about is people that are trying to, because they're trying to update the paradigm in general in order to find solutions to problems and move those problems from becoming a dysfunctional element in our lives to a functional element in our lives. There's a criteria. They have to be true innovators, true free thinkers. A lot of quote-unquote free thinkers, they are 100% muqallideen, or copiers, and they are the exact mirror image of the people that they despise the most. Those are the people of the turas, or that are hanging on to the entire historical product that came to us, that we generally call Islam, even though it is, there's layers and layers and layers of human contribution to it.
And those are the ones that are looking to the past.
Those
for
are the
all
ones
the solutions.
exactly looking to the past, all solutions. I don't know what the exact English terminology would be, but in Arabic, at-turathiyun, turath is the heritage. At-turathiyun, people who are of heritage. So those people are despised by, quote unquote, the free thinkers, right? But the reality is, those are the exact mirror image of those, because those are muqallideen, people of the past.
Yeah.
And the people of the running forward toward Europe and America are muqallideen as well.
So
they're exactly the same.
So those are copiers
deep down.
and those are copiers.
Yes, on the surface they look dipolar opposites. Deep down they are the same, because those thinkers, whatever comes from Europe and whatever comes from the existential paradigm or the atheist paradigm in general, they just give it a certificate of approval in Arabic, or they give it, they translate it into Arabic, or they try to say, oh, this is Islam, Islam agrees with this, Islam agrees with that. But the problem is, and this is the key point, the problem is they're not free thinking. They're muqallideen. They're not innovators. And you need true innovation to find solutions.
Right. So what is the distinction then between what you are trying to accomplish with this book versus what those guys are doing? Because they're trying to update what is there, right there. We're not talking about those abandoning. We're talking about people who are just, they're just copying, like the West versus what you are trying to do. And in the end, does it really matter where the solution comes from if the solution is good?
So if the solution is good, of course, if you find a solution that is good and does not contradict with our identity and our faith, obviously that's a good solution. Can I say that it's not good? Of course not. I mean, it's good. It works. But what I'm trying to say is the solution has to be original and genuine. What does that mean? It has to come from us. You cannot take the Western culture and transplant it in our lives, thinking that that is the solution. You cannot copy and paste. So what these people are doing, they're copying and pasting. What I'm doing is, I'm going back to the details of the Islamic epistemology, every single root, I'm flipping through every single detail, no matter how small or how big. Not of Islamic knowledge in general, but Islamic epistemology. How did we come to understand that knowledge? They're not doing that. All they're doing is they are receiving whatever the West says they need to receive, or they are copying an existing model that grew in Europe or in the United States, and they want to just transplant it. That's not going to work. If the solution has to be genuine from within. That's why you have to be innovative. What does innovative mean? You know where you're coming from. You know your religion. You know your faith. You know what is valuable and what is less valuable, and what is less valuable, you can actually make that distinction. And then you come up with a solution that is a best fit for you and your surrounding and your society and your culture. I don't know how these people think when they supposedly come up with a solution for an intellectual problem that is 100% Western oriented or atheist oriented, and they want to say, oh, this is what Islam should be and this is what Muslims should follow, and they know for a fact that it's going to generate such a negative feeling within the society, and it's going to put so much stress on the society, and it's going to be refused and expelled. It's not going to cause the positive effect and impact that they are wishing for. I mean, part of having basic sense is to know the patient. If you want to speak in medical terminology, you want to know where the patient is. You want to know what the problem is. what disease is, they want to have an accurate diagnosis, they want to know what the patient is, and where the patient is on the scale of health, and what is the most appropriate next step. Because if you want to design a rehab program to bring a non-functional human being to a functional status, you want to go through specific steps that will actually benefit. Like if you have a patient that is lost a leg, an amputee, okay, and the next day you want them to participate in a rehab program that involves running, is that going to work? It's not going to work. So these people that just bring prepackaged, preformed, copied solutions from the West and just want to impose it on us, they don't realize that basically it's just a big waste of time. It's not going to work. Not to mention that it's not necessarily true. So what we need to do is be innovators, not copiers. And how do you become an innovator? First of all, you learn. You go back and learn. And invariably, and this is what I was trying to say about when you look at a problem and you try to find a solution, and in the process you find yourself that you made some kind of update. For example, update of the meaning of the hadith that I mentioned to you about the time frame from 3 40 day periods to the same 40 period. And then every time you do that, you realize that you're actually entertaining epistemology. You're entertaining epistemology. You're entertaining through the examples of the things that you're going through, but the binding theme, the rope that connects all of this process together is you're entertaining epistemology. So you go back and you study epistemology. And when you go back and study epistemology in real detail, then you can actually build on it real knowledge. That's innovation. That's not copying. I mean, copying is you just listen to one of those militant atheists, whatever they tell you, or the universities, whatever they tell you, without critical thinking, and you take it and you want to stuff it down people's throats. That's not innovation. That's taqlid. Just like the people of the past, they just do taqlid to a different background, to a different source.
Okay, so then I think the next step then is to delve into the concept of the paradigm then, right?
Yes.
So by all means.
So, first of all, and I'm going to go back and forth with examples because the issue of the paradigm is so abstract that it may be better just to keep flipping between the concept and an example. First of all, the whole concept of paradigm was actually, there was a scientist, his last name was Koons, I think. I'm not sure what his first name was. And he wrote a book about science. And he said that science goes through phases of what he called normal science and a phase of what he called revolutionary science. And the difference between normal science and revolutionary science is normal science scientists are engaging in problem solving. They have rules, they have a basic understanding of the subject that they are doing, let's say chemistry or physics or mechanics or whatever it is. They have basic understanding of that, and they are trying to do research. And as they do research, the purpose of research is to explain observation. And to explain the observation, they need to create theories, and those theories become, sometimes they're puzzles and they need to solve them. But they always solve them based on the established concepts of that field. But then, sometimes puzzles cannot be solved easily, or the solution to those puzzles become very weak, non-convincing, doesn't fit the data very well, and anomalies start showing up here and there. And then when these things sort of pile up, people start realizing that the model that they have is not reflecting reality anymore. Any model actually doesn't reflect reality, but some models are functional, but with time they become dysfunctional as more and more data is collected from observation.
But why do you say any model is not?
So any model any paradigm, any model, is an idealized version of reality. Is not really reality because it lacks the details of reality. Reality is out there. You know, whether we know it or not, whether we understand it or not, it's out there and it's going to stay out there. Even after we die, it's going to stay out there. The model is our understanding of reality. Reality has infinite details. Our understanding of reality has finite details. So surely at some point we will have to idealize. For example, I mean, you have a concept called a tree in your head, right? If I tell you a tree, you know what I'm talking about. But there's nothing in reality called a tree in general. You know, there is an apricot tree, there's an apple tree, there is an oak tree, and every single one has subspecies, and even if you go to an individual tree, it's not exactly the same as the other tree. So when you are calling all of that tree, you're idealizing. You're not really reflecting reality, you're idealizing. So every model is an idealization at the end of the day. But that's the way the human mind works. You don't have a choice. You idealize. But with time, this model may become dysfunctional. And as the model becomes dysfunctional, people tend, or some people, the innovators, people working in normal science, they're just validating the paradigm. Even beginning with their research questions. With time, people realize there's a problem and they start looking into the primary assumptions. And then somebody comes up with a new innovative solution. For example, I can give you an example. To assign an actual charge to particles, like negative charge for the electrons and positive charge for protons, to assign that concept of charge was a solution to an ever-growing problematic model that eventually failed and doesn't exist right now. And the new innovative solution that someone comes up with, and boom, all of a sudden you have a major update on the paradigm. Sometimes even you have a completely different paradigm. That's called revolutionary science. So that's where the concept comes in. But then after that, even the scientist Kunz that wrote this book, the terminology entered into the culture and discourse in general, and people speak in paradigm in not just in the scientific realm, in more than that. So paradigm is basically the theoretical framework that you approach any subject with, the theoretical framework that you ascribe to, like a set of primary assumptions. Any theory you want to go into, because again, there's observation, and there is the story that puts these observations together. There's the observations. The observations don't tell you a story. Your mind tells you what the story is. And that story is the theory. That story is the explanation. That story, or the explanation, or the way you order the observation was, that is that is the epistemology that you ascribe to, because you could have ordered or arranged those findings in a different way. And if you arrange them, let me give you an example. In Christianity, there is a basic axiom. You either subtract it or you don't. Basic axiom called salvation has to go through sacrifice of the divine. Now, when you try to question them about this, they're hostage to it. They cannot imagine salvation without sacrifice of the divine. You and me, we see that as almost ridiculous. I mean, why the salvation has to go through sacrifice of the divine? It is what it is. It's an axiom. It's a starting point. If you ascribe to that starting point, if you agree to enter into the theoretical framework of the Christian religion through that starting point, you're automatically hostage to it. So it's a choice. There is an axiom in the sect of Shia. Again, that axiom is very difficult to prove, but it's done by choice. And that axiom goes something like this: there has to be, just like there has to be a prophet to deliver the faith, there has to be an imam to protect the faith. So it's an axiom, and if you and the Shia ascribe to that, and you just ask them, why does there has to be an imam? Oh, to protect the faith. But this is circular logic. Just like the Christians when they tell, well, why does the divine has to sacrifice to save you? Well, why do you have to say? Why does this salvation has to go through the divine? It's a circle of logic. There's no rational explanation for this. Just like there's no rational explanation why there should be an imam to begin with. So, as you dig deep down, you find those assumptions. You list those primary assumptions that that a person ascribed to, and they're relatively finite. But some of them are built on top of each other. But the sum of all those that create the framework that you entertain any subject, that is your epistemology. That's your paradigm, and that paradigm is how you're going to view the world through. And there is lots and lots and lots of a human construct into this paradigm. In the case of there is some observation that comes from the surrounding, but there's a lot of human interpretation around those observations. Just like in the religious paradigm, there is the revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has gave us, but there's a lot of human addition to it. For example, and the paradigm, Islamic paradigm for us, is mainly, you mainly find it in the discipline of usul al-fiqh, which is the theoretical framework upon which fiqh is built. But you also find...
What is fiqh?
Fiqh is what Islam asks you to do in every single situation that you might find yourself. So there's fiqh ibadat, is how to pray, how to fast, how to do your zakah or hajj. There's fiqh mu'amalat, or how do you conduct your trade. There's fiqh uqubat, the punishments for different transgressions. And there's fiqh related to the family, marriage, divorce, children, nursing, all of that stuff. So all of that is the what's the lawful and allowed conduct for society, basically. So that's fiqh. But as people, just like I give you the example of people trying to go through examples of problems and finding updates and solution, they invariably discover at some point that they're entertaining epistemology. Muslims at the same thing, as they did fiqh, and usul fiqh actually came after in documentation. They were doing usul fiqh, whether they realized it or not, whether they were conscientious of it or not. Later, of course, they were very conscientious of it. Initially, they weren't very conscientious of it, but with time, they realized that they're doing usul fiqh, and they started writing down the theoretical framework for fiqh. And then the documentation, not practice, documentation of usul al-fiqh, it came after fiqh, but the practice was simultaneous. So most of the Islamic epistemology that we ascribe to, that came to us, you will find it in the discipline of usul al-fiqh, but you will find also elements of it in the discipline of mustalah al-hadith. You will find elements.
What is
mustalah al-hadith? Mustalah al-hadith is the theoretical framework of how you purify the hadith, because the hadith is, anyone can ascribe any statement to the Prophet. Hadith is the narration that people say, so-and-so said that so-and-so said that so-and-so said that the Prophet ﷺ said, and then they narrate a particular text, usually a sentence or two or three. Some hadiths are longer, but that's the hadith. But how do you evaluate if this hadith is good or not? That discipline is called usul al-hadith or mustalah al-hadith. Let's just stick with the word usul al-hadith because it mirrors the word usul al-fiqh. So most of the Islamic epistemology, you find it in usul al-fiqh and usul al-hadith. You find there is a discipline that came in fiqh after usul al-fiqh. It's called the theories of fiqh or qawa'id al-fiqhiyya. You find some of the Islamic epistemology in qawa'id al-fiqhiyya, and that particular subject, in a nutshell, as people, they developed the theoretical framework for fiqh, they laid out what fiqh is, but then they realized there's general themes. There are general concepts that are being repeated in fiqh, and those became the qawaid al-fiqhiyya. For example, la darar wa la dirar. La darar wa la dirar means no harm to be bestowed on party A and no harm to be bestowed on party B. It's a very abstract issue, but the bottom line is it's also a place where you find some of the Islamic epistemology. So the set of items that comprise the theoretical framework is the paradigm. And why do you need to use it? Because simply the human brain doesn't work in any other way. You cannot, whether you realize it or not, whether you're conscientious of it or not, you cannot approach reality without a paradigm. Let me give you sort of an analogy. How do you think, to the best of our knowledge, of course, there's some assumption in this. How do you think a bat views the world?
Through sonar.
Sound waves.
Yeah.
Do you think they actually, again, to the best of our knowledge, do you think they actually assign names to things? They just look at them, through their perception of sound waves. How do you think a dog views the world? Mainly. I mean, obviously smell is a big element. Well, this is what humans are. Humans have a brain that needs to assign things. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا in Surah Al-Baqarah, in Surah Al-Baqarah. He gave him the ability to name things. We need to name things. We need to identify and name things so we can do what? So we can start organizing it into our heads. What we have, and maybe some animals have a little bit of it, but what we definitely have, we have the ability to have abstract thinking. What is abstract thinking? Anything that is not direct sense, direct sound, direct images, direct taste, and so forth. Anything more than that is an abstract thinking. For example, the concept of a tree. As simple as you might find this concept, as simple as you might find it, it's a very, very, very abstract idea. Because now that you have a concept called a tree in your head and you have a multitude of concepts, you can put them together, you can create new knowledge, you can think about this, you can run it through your head. This is how the human brain works. So you need some kind of idealized version of reality with some kind of assumptions and starting points to go. But the problem is, sometimes you don't realize it. Sometimes you live in the paradigm so long, and again, you're born into it, or you go to college and all the professors you've ever met in your life talk to you about it, and you mistake the paradigm for reality. And that's what people call, you mistake the map for the territory. The paradigm is a map. A map is an idealized version of the territory that you're actually looking at. It is not the territory exactly. It doesn't even come close in terms of the details of that territory. But it's an idealized version. So, and to give you a simple proof of that, for the longest time, before, for example, I know, cosmology is a little bit outside our field, but it helps to illustrate the idea. Before Big Bang Theory came to be the dominant, established paradigm of cosmology, there was something else. And that something else, for the longest time, people sat and talked about it as if it was the truth. And they went to universities, and they wrote books about it, and they wrote essays and took exams, and they were graded on those exams based on that paradigm. And then it collapsed, and a new paradigm came to be. So don't find the idea of living so long within the paradigm to the point that you don't distinguish it from reality, don't find it too foreign. It's just a matter of how critically people want to think when they're trying to address problems and ideas. And this is not to say that you have to question the paradigm every day on a daily basis. You never get anything done if you do. But if you have a dysfunctional paradigm, that you know doesn't work, and you only accept it, and you only, we sit down and talk among each other that, what we have is actually working in a dogmatic way. Is it really working? There's problem A, problem B, problem C, problem. When you lay out all these problems, is it really working? When you have a dysfunctional paradigm, then you have to sort of be a little bit more of a critical thinker and go back to to try and understand the paradigm, distinguish it from reality. In our case, trying to distinguish a little bit the Islamic epistemology that we have from the essence of Islam, so we can be able to update those human components. So that's why. So that's first one was what the paradigm is, and the second one is why paradigms, because that's how the human brain works. As far as the structure of paradigm, obviously it starts with the axioms, and I have some axioms that I can tell you what are that are starting points. You know, if people may argue, are these actually like the most fundamental axioms of the Islamic paradigm, or is there something deep down? Doesn't matter. I mean, they are focus points, whether you want to call them the most bottom layer of Islamic paradigm thinking or Islamic epistemology or not, but they are nonetheless very, very crucial points. And every one of them can be reevaluated. For example, and we're going to go into details those later, but just as an example of an axiom, there's the issue of al-aql wal-naql, for example. Al-aql wal-naql is the text and the mind. What is the text and what is the mind? What is the role of the mind in relationship to the text? Where does the mind come in terms of order with the text? You know, and what is the text in terms of the text is actually texts. It's a plural, not just one text. But all of this is an axiom. It's a starting point. If you, and depending on how you arrange the aql wal naql, you start seeing the different Islamic schools that come about from a historic standpoint. You know, if you value the text and you completely sort of distract the mind, you value the naql and you do away with the aql, you may end up with a school, for example, al-Zahiri that we talked about yesterday. If you sort of have role for both, but you prioritize the text, you're pretty much well within the territory of most a large part of the Sunni paradigm. If you give the aql a little bit more control over the text, and I'm not saying which is better than which, I'm just saying in general, because there's pros and cons to everything, and there's obviously the devil in the detail. But if you give a little bit more to the aql, you will end up with the school of Mu'tazili that pretty much extinct right now as a organized school within the Islamic world or an organized paradigm, but the human inclination to use aql still exists sporadically. So you find sporadic people that more or less are Mu'tazili flavor. And then if you just use the aql and dump the text completely, you will end up with another school that is a minority school but also extinct, which is called the school of the philosophy or the Islamic philosophers, who almost but dump the text completely. So that's an axiom. How you arrange this, what are the details of those two and how you arrange it as an axiom, it's a starting point. Another axiom of Islamic paradigm is the concept of an-nasakh. Which means an-nasakh is when you come to a verse in the Quran and because of X, Y, and Z, you consider the verse still there, you still recite it, you still get hasanat for reciting it, but you do not utilize it. It's basically from a utility standpoint, it's an expired text. That's what the nasakh is. The whole concept of nasakh wal mansukh, it's an axiom. If you ascribe to it, your entire intellectual product is going to be affected by it, because it's a very, very early on choice that you're making with the set of decisions and the set of tools that you have from an epistemologic standpoint as you approach what you're going to call, or what your school is going to call, Islam, which is not really Islam, it's your version of Islam.
Just to clarify, the nasakh and mansukh thing, it's a really big topic in and of itself, but I mean, one can easily argue that yes, maybe the utility of it is no longer in place because it has been updated with another verse in the Quran, but there's still lessons to be derived from it because of the time that it came. It came at a certain time, and we learned valuable lessons. And then the fact that it was updated to something else can also be a lesson that's derived from it. So, I think it's a little bit harsh to say that it doesn't have any more utility. It's just you know what I mean.
Now you're trying to get as much benefit out of it as possible. But when I say utility, I mean fiqh, ahkam al-fiqh. The established ahkam al-fiqh.
Yeah.
Don't use it. They don't use it. I mean, you if you find it, and I agree with you. I mean, it's almost a waste, right? I mean, this is a verse from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're not going to use it. It's problematic to say the least. But from ahkam al-fiqh, you don't use it. So imagine. I'm just going to ask you a question. Imagine how you have this intellectual roadmap or how to approach fiqh, okay? And imagine how that the fiqh product looks like if you include the concept of nasikh mansukh versus if you exclude the concept of nasikh mansukh. Is it going to look different?
Yeah.
That's exactly what I mean by how your paradigm is going to affect your... So it's an axiom, it's a fundamental issue. Another axiom, which is a very, very big, if not the biggest axiom of all, is what is the definition of the accepted sunnah or accepted hadith? Or, that's a very big topic. And another axiom, which is also extremely big, what is the relationship between the hadith and the Quran? Because how you define the relationship between the hadith and the Quran, you will end up with different intellectual product. For example, you could ascribe to the school that says hadith can actually yansakh al-Quran, can actually create a verse in the Quran to become mansukh or of no utility. Obsolete. Versus another concept. No, every single hadith that you're going to accept has to at least not be contradictory to the Quran. That is a very fundamental decision, very fundamental choice. That goes to the core of the axiom of the paradigm that you're building. The paradigm is completely different, and thus the intellectual product is completely different. So these are examples, and we'll talk about those in details later, but these are examples of the axioms. So when I talk about what is the structure of the paradigm, structure paradigm begins with axioms, and those axioms, they can you can build on top of them sort of semi-axioms and so forth. And as it's a continuum at the end of the day. It's not like there's distinct cutoff. You start with very, very, very general concepts, and it's intellectually it's like building a web. And at the end of the web, you have your final product, and in between you have things that are in between. So the further you are down to the general concepts that you're deriving, the more you are in the theoretical framework, the more you are in the core of the paradigm. So, because paradigm is an idealized version of reality, because paradigm is your understanding of reality, and we're talking about paradigm in general here. We're not necessarily talking about the Islamic paradigm, but the same applies. It's sooner or later that paradigm is going to contradict reality at something. Sooner or later there's going to be, the input into the system, reality, the environment, in theory, has infinite, or let's say very large, information that can be exposed. The system can be exposed to as time goes by, because new information is being learned, new ideas are being learned, new things are being discovered. So sooner or later the paradigm fails, and you have something called anomalies, and the anomalies are contradiction. I'll give you an example of a contradiction in the atheist paradigm. The atheist paradigm says the universe was created out of nothing. And when you ask them, well, how is the universe created out of nothing? And they say because it's created out of nothing and out of zero energy, God is not a requirement. When you ask them, how is the universe created out of nothing? They say it's a function of space. that you could have quantum fluctuations in space, and those quantum fluctuations can create quote-unquote energy for a minuscule amount of time, and that can blossom into the universe. But when you ask him, well, did space come with the universe, or there was space before the universe? And they say, no, space is a product of the universe. So basically, quantum fluctuation that is an attribute of space, that is product of the universe, is being used as an attribute, as a cause of the universe. So you're using an attribute of the universe to explain to give a cause of the creation of the universe. That is circular reasoning. That is basically circular. That is basically, it's a lot of fancy rubbish that is basically at its core, when you reduce it, he's saying the universe created itself. That's a contradiction. There is no answer to that. I assure you, the only answer they have to that is to confuse you and throw at you fancy terminology and some physics terminology, and they show you PhD people in ties and big conferences. That is the only thing they can actually do, because there's no answer whatsoever to that contradiction, and so forth. Many contradictions. Another. I can give you an example of contradiction in the. And of course, they try to answer the contradiction, but they give you a weak answer to the contradiction. I'll give you an example, contradiction in the Islamic paradigm, for example, and the issue of nisakh. We'll go back to the issue of nisakh. There are three types of nisakh, and there's nisakh when the text stays, the verse of the Quran stays, you recite it and you get the hasanat from it, but you don't use it. This is called nisakh al-hukm. Al-hukm, which is the jurisprudence that comes out of that's with being nisakh, not the text itself, but the actual hukm that comes out of it. So that's category number one. This category number two, there is a nisakh of al-hukm wa tilawi. Tilawi is the recitation. Basically, you take the verse completely out of the Quran, never to go back to the Quran. That's how they view it. And of course, because you took the verse out of the Quran, you also lose the hukm that came out of that verse. You're not using the verse, and you're not using the jurisprudence that came out of this verse. And then category number three, which is, a contradiction to say the least. You take the verse out of the Quran, but you keep the hukm. Problematic, right? Problematic. But there's actually, if you read the Islamic literature, that's actually an accepted concept in Islam. It's contradiction. I mean, I can easily see it's contradiction. Maybe you can easily see it's contradiction, but it's an accepted. And the example of that, and interestingly enough, there's one example of that that has an actual hukm. There's multiple examples, but they don't really have hukm. But the one example that has a hukm that belongs to this category, number three, is the stoning of people that commit zina.
Of an adulterer.
Yes. And the whole supposed verse that was taken out of the Quran, but the hukm stays, the whole verse is problematic, to say the least. And inshallah we'll go over it as well. But as an anomaly, as a contradiction, you ask them to, and I researched, trying to find a shred of a reasonable explanation to this. And the explanation is not reasonable, to say the least. I mean, one of the explanations that I've read is Allah took it out of the Quran. Again, that's what they believe. Allah took it out of the Quran because He was afraid that we will it's too traumatic to our souls when you read about it. Yeah, does make sense. Yes, but that's actually, it's a contradiction. Again, people can't really when you have a full-blown contradiction, people can't.
But I'm sorry, I'm going to go back just a little bit. This concept of removing verses from the Quran is very alien to me. I've never heard of it before. So you're saying that there was a verse that was removed from the Quran.
According to the concept of nasikh wa mansukh, if you ascribe to the concept of nasikh wa mansukh as a fundamental tool in your set of tools that you call your Islamic paradigm, so you can build your understanding of Islam, if you ascribe to that, there are three kinds. There's the kind which people think is nasikh, but it's only 1 out of 3, which is the verse stays in the Quran, you recite it, but you don't use it.
Yeah, and I would assume that the vast majority of people who believe in Nasakh Mansukh would attribute themselves to that first category.
Yes, but if you dig deeper into it, there's 2 more categories. There's the category where the entire verse is removed and the hukum of that verse. Sort of makes sense, right?
Right.
I mean, you may find it problematic that there is a verse that is being removed to begin with.
Yeah.
First of all, do we need to reset the move?
I kept it going for
Okay.
so.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. You know what? Let's